Alright, what is up on the box, guys? This is TopHat Productions 115 coming to you from a pre-recorded video that will hopefully be edited if necessary and then re-uploaded to YouTube and Twitch at the right time once everything has been processed, looked over, and analyzed for any errors that need to be corrected after the fact. With that said, that means that this video is going to be delayed for possibly a few days, just depending on how long it takes to upload, in addition to whatever edits need to be made in post-process. I'm just going to go and hop right in. Earlier, you saw us doing a few tests on YouTube and Twitch at differing resolutions. At first, we started out in 1080p at 60 FPS, and then from there we started changing a few bitrate settings and stuff like that. We upped the bitrate a bit, and we had changed from CBR, constant bitrate, to VBR, variable bitrate. From there, we then increased the resolution to 4K near the very end, and from our initial tests, it looked like the 4K resolution actually would have worked. However, once I attempted to do an actual live stream in 4K, things started to go to crap. So that is why I'm coming to you from a pre-recorded video. We will not be using Restream.io for this week until things get sorted out. And in addition to that, Restream.io currently has a video description limit of, I think it's like 3,000 characters or something like that. And as a result, if I ever do another live stream in the near future, I'll have to put what looks to be a video description stub first. And then from there, once the live stream is finished, I'll have to come back to Twitch and YouTube separately and update the video description after the fact. It'll only add like maybe a few seconds, but once that happens, all the information should be up to date and relevant again. So no big issue there. But yeah, 4K live streaming is going to take a bit to actually work. Still working on getting it configured properly in OBS. And with Twitch, while the live stream did show up kind of on and off with YouTube, it just stopped working after our few initial test streams. So 4K live streaming is still a bit of a ways away. Not only that, but near the end of our testing tonight, we actually encountered a few issues where the encoder would be overloaded after a bit. And that was with using both NVENC and also SoftwareX 264. So with that, 4K live streaming is definitely a bit of a ways away. I'm just going to jump into today's topics. Firstly, we're going to talk about the server project, and specifically the how should I say this? Efforts that were put into making the LSI SAS controller card work. And it all starts right after the last stream that I did 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I did a stream talking about how the commute cable wasn't the right cable that I was supposed to use to power the SAS controller card, the LSI card. Well, that was only the beginning. Once I swapped out the commute cable for a working power cable, the SATA power extender, I then experienced, or should I say encountered, a few other issues. Even after getting the drive cage to power up properly with all the indicator lights glowing as it should be, the drives would not show up in BIOS for any devices that the drives, or should I say, for any devices that the LSI adapter was connected to. So the first round of testing involves me taking the LSI SAS card and the drive cage that it was connected to, taking that and inserting that into the T7500. When inserting to the T7500, the actual the SAS controller, the not the embedded SAS controller, but the LSI SAS controller would be detected in Windows Device Manager, but not the drives. And I also tested it on my laptop, and the way I tested it on the laptop was through a powered PCIe dock. on the laptop, I experienced the same issue where only the SAS controller, as in the LSI SAS controller, was visible in Device Manager for Windows, but the drives were not visible. And this was even with the drive cage powered properly. And as I said before, the way that I could tell that the drive cage was powered is because of the fact that the power indicator lights were actually on, and not only that, but the drive activity indicator lights, they actually turn purple whenever there is an attempt at or a successful drive access. And in this case, only the power indicators were coming on. No purple lights were seen, which means that the OS did not make any drive access attempts. And that pretty much fell in line with what I was seeing in Device Manager. So after the testing on both the workstation and the laptop, and making sure that the drive cage is powered, because at this point I had tried making sure that it was powered by having it connected to both the server and also to the workstation, because both the server and the workstation had spare SATA power connectors. As you may or may not know, the drive cage itself actually uses SATA power connectors to power itself. So in one instance I would have the server powering it, in another instance I would have the workstation powering it. And this was just a test to make sure that the cage was being powered properly, which pretty much confirmed that it wasn't an issue of power this time, and pretty much restricted the issue to being either the drive cage, the cable between the drive cage and the LSI SAS controller, or the actual SAS controller itself. In order to eliminate a few more factors, what I ended up doing is then removing the HBA from the equation. I removed the HBA and also the accompanying cable, and instead tested the drive cage with the drives in it directly. Took the drive cage, powered it off of both the workstation and the server, but in each case I had the drives before I say anything more, the drive cage has both SATA power and SATA data physical connectors. It has 4 SATA data connectors for each drive in the cage, but only 2 power connectors to power all 4 drives. So in this case, I had the drive cage powered by the server for like half of the trials, and then powered by the workstation for the other half of the trials. And what I did was I actually had the drive cage sitting next to the workstation, and I took one of the SATA data cables from the workstation and plugged it into each one of the SATA data connectors on the drive cage. And each time, the hard drives in the cage would show up. So the workstation detected the drives when it was directly connected to the drive cage without the LSI SAS controller in between it and the drives. And the only reason I was able to actually test that out at all is because of the fact that the T7500 has its own built-in SAS controller. And the SAS controller on the T7500 for sure works, because that's what all the drives in the T7500 are connected to, which pretty much eliminated some uncertainty. So at that point, we had pretty much limited the source of the problems to either the LSI SAS controller itself or the data cable. However, after doing a little bit more testing with the T7500, and this time it was with a Linux live CD, an old Linux live CD, but nonetheless a Linux live CD, what would happen is some of the drives would show up in the live CD and some of the drives wouldn't show up. And due to the fact that the results from testing with the Linux live CD were kind of spotty, it brought into question whether or not the drive cage itself was doing some sort of funniness where it possibly, once again, wasn't powering the drives adequately. And that was with I think it was with the server powering the drive cage that time when I had it when I had the live CD and the T7500. So at that point, the only other test that I could run was to actually have the Linux live CD running from the server itself to see if it wasn't due to any limitations on the T7500 itself. So I took the let me check here on the itinerary. It was a very long process, by the way. This happened over the course of like a week. But yeah, initially I was testing the live CD one drive at a time. And yeah, actually, there was one more thing that ended up happening before I just moved the drive to the server. What I ended up doing was I actually took the LSI SAS controller and I hooked it up to the laptop one more time. But this time, instead of just hooking it up to the laptop to see if I could see the drives, I hooked it up to the PCIe dock like I did last time and decided to actually update the firmware on the SAS controller. Now how I did that was I took a copy of MegaRAID Storage Manager, installed it onto the laptop, hooked up the HBA to the laptop via that PCIe dock that I just mentioned, and upgraded the firmware to the latest IT firmware. The latest IT firmware was on version 20, and the firmware version that the HBA came with was version 17. So this would have, or at least should have, gotten it up to date with the latest available firmware, seeing that the latest available firmware was, I think, released in like 2015 or 2016. And after doing that update, what ended up happening is the LSI SAS controller, as usual, showed up in Device Manager. But then the drives themselves also started to show up in Device Manager, but they showed up sporadically. They would, at first all 4 drives showed up, then only 2, then 1, and then like 2 again, then 4. They would show up, they would blink in and out of Device Manager sporadically. And I can kind of hear my GPU fans kicking in there. But long story short, the drives showed up sporadically, and that led my friend and I into thinking that the PCIe dock possibly wasn't providing enough power for the HBA. So what I ended up doing as a result was I actually took the HBA off of the PCIe dock and put it directly into the server at that point, because the results that I was getting from testing on the laptop and the workstation were kind of inconclusive at that point. And at some point, I was going to have to actually test the HBA in its intended environment, which was the server. And sure enough, after hooking up the LSI HBA to the server and putting in that same Linux live CD, I was actually able to see all 4 drives in the Linux live CD. And of course, once you see the drives, the next step logically is to try to pull smart data from those drives to see how they're doing, to see if they're actually in good condition, because I bought these drives used off of eBay. We were unfortunately unable to pull smart data from the drives because of the fact that the format in which the smart data was provided seemed to be non-standard. Somehow the original Linux live CD that I had was able to somewhat interpret that non-standard smart data, but only for one of the drives. One of the drives worked almost perfectly, like I think the first drive in the cage, but the other 3, for some reason, kept on, I don't know if I can even find the error that showed up, but what happened was that either the drive controller itself or like the drive cage controller or something in between, one of the controllers in that chain kept on resetting, I think, and as a result it was like pretty much impossible to access smart data for the other 3 drives. We were able to pull data for one drive, but not the other 3 drives in that cage. and that pretty much prevented us from being able to actually see whether or not the drives were okay, whether or not they would work in a 24/7 long-term environment. So after seeing that the live CD that I currently had wasn't working, it was suggested that I get a newer live CD image. And what I ended up doing was I actually pulled the latest image from the website for the distro that I picked, and instead of putting the live CD physically into the optical drive slot on the server, I even got to test out the virtual media feature on HP's ILO3 dashboard, and I have to say it worked out pretty nicely. So I sent up the latest ISO to the server via the virtual media feature, and surprise, surprise, the latest live CD once again saw the HBA but didn't see the drives that were connected. So we ended up not even being able to pull any smart data from the latest live CD, which was kind of a step back. At that point, there was really no reason to keep on testing Linux live CDs because there was no way to access the drives and to see the smart data that we were looking for. And it just became apparent that from there, we would have to actually test it out in ESXi to see if ESXi could see the smart data itself. So I went on, disabled the removed the ISO from the virtual media feature because there is no more need to test that. And what I ended up doing instead was I powered on the server again, booted it into ESXi with both the LSI HBA and the drives connected. Went into ESXi once it finished booting, looked at storage adapters, storage devices. Lo and behold, it saw the HBA and the 4 terabyte drives. Not only that, but you know what I forgot to mention. When I tested out the latest Linux live CD on the server to try to see the drives once more, I actually went on and inserted the Intel SSD as well, the one that wasn't working too well a week ago. I inserted that one and formatted it again as GPT. This time, instead of using Windows, I used the Linux live CD because it was suggested that maybe the SSD just wasn't playing nice with Windows for some reason. And from what I can tell, that might have been the case. The SSD showed up in ESXi and vCenter, and the 4 terabyte hard drives also showed up in ESXi and vCenter. After that, I ended up adding the Intel SSD to the virtual flash pool, and now the server currently has just over 1 terabyte of virtual flash, and that will be allocated to all the VMs in the near future. The 4 terabyte hard drives, of course, had to be GPT schemed before being added to ESXi, and how I did that was back when I had the older Linux live CD, I formatted or schemed the 4 terabyte drives as GPT then, before moving on to the new live CD. So that's how all the drives showed up in ESXi. After seeing all the drives in ESXi, I once again tried to pull smart data, this time through ESXCLI, the command line tool, command line interface. And when I tried to run the commands, once again, I wasn't able to pull much of any data. This time, pretty much all 4 of the drives showed no relevant smart data. And I think one of the drives, yes, and only one of the drives showed any metrics whatsoever. It was like 1 metric, and I think it was either having to do with read or write errors, but one of them had like absurdly high read or write errors of some sort. But from what I could see, not just from what I could see, from what we could see, my friend and I could pretty much, we we both could tell that ESXi possibly wasn't interpreting the smart data that the drives were presenting correctly. So went on and did another round of just short-term research on the drives, and it just so happens that the drives, I think, were actually made for a I think they were made for an either an embedded, like an OEM solution from IBM. They're called Storewise drives, and they're from the 7000 series. So from what I can tell, those drives are probably made to be in a specialized enclosure, and that specialized enclosure probably had the proper software that was required to actually read that smart data correctly. However, I don't have that software or specialized hardware, and as such, I won't really be able to easily read that smart data. So I'm going to have to probably just play it by ear and constantly monitor the drive's performance metrics to see if or when the drives may give up the ghost. Hopefully they have a good few years of life left to give, but I do not know that at this time, and as such I'm kind of just playing it close to the cuff. So that is where we are right now. Virtual Flash resource pool is working great, and we have the 4 terabyte drives working for now, which is also great, but we don't know how much life they have left in them, and there's bound to be more tests that need to be run on them in the near future. So moving on to the next topic, I'm going to skip over 4K for now and move straight to the Minecraft Modpack. Updates for FIIK and Dynamic Nature will be coming in the next 2 weeks, hopefully before Halloween. They both need updates, and for the most part there will be maybe 1 or 2 incremental updates before Halloween. Halloween, of course, will be the Nightmare update, as I mentioned before. And Mage Bending, on the other hand, I am not sure at this time. If anything, I could try doing like an incremental update of sorts for Mage Bending, but I can't guarantee it because it's not my mod pack. Once again, I don't control that mod pack primarily. That is controlled by a third party, and as such I can't confirm anything until everyone from the Mage Bending team agrees. There is also a new mod pack in the works. That thing got delayed again, just due to the new equipment that came in that is currently in-house, and also partially due to the move to 4K, which isn't going as smoothly as we had expected. Speaking of the move to 4K, I'm going to go and start talking about that right now. Firstly, if you've been paying attention to our external content streams, like Linus Tech Tips Forum and stuff like that, you would know that we actually picked up a few new 4K backgrounds, like the one that you're seeing right now, and also the one from Google Chrome. We've also been adjusting settings here and there to actually make sure that the 4K experience looks good for you guys whenever I do a live stream, and also to try to reduce system load during live streams because of the fact that 4K is much more intensive than 1080p. And as you can possibly tell right now, I'm not using X264 software. I'm actually using the NVENC encoder on the GTX 1070, and that is because of the fact that the load that would have otherwise occurred due to 4K 60 would possibly be too much for the T75 to handle while doing other workloads, possibly such as gaming and such. And I didn't want that to become an issue in the future, so I went on and switched over to NVENC for the first time. So far, it appears to be working pretty well, at least for recording. However, we haven't gotten it to work for anything long form in streaming, anything longer than like 3 to 5 minutes. It's just been a pain. In addition to that, there have also been some new issues that have cropped up recently while testing with Restream.io, just as of tonight. During the initial testing, we were able to stream to both Twitch and YouTube just fine. However, now it's become a bit more problematic. When trying to stream to both of them, streaming to Twitch kind of works on and off, and streaming to YouTube just doesn't work at all now. And on top of that, it appears as though the chat, as you can see, like I can message to chat just fine for Twitch, but I cannot seem to get Discord or YouTube working right now for some reason. I don't really know why that is, but as of now, that impacts the way that we can do things, especially when it comes to live content, because of the fact that there really won't be any live content for at least the next week or so until this gets fixed. I have no idea what may be causing it, but if it isn't fixed in the next few days, I may just revert back to 1080p and just do a higher bitrate stream instead. I mean, it wouldn't really be something that I'd want to do. I actually wanted to test out 4K streaming at some point in the near future to see if that could become the new norm, but if this continues as it is right now, 4K is going to get pushed off for at least probably the next few months into like 2021, which I mean I wouldn't really mind, but at the same time though I was really hoping to actually start doing 4K late this year, possibly before 2021. But that's really all there is to talk about for now when it comes to the transition to 4K. It is a bumpy ride, and as a result, if I want to do 4K on a consistent basis, I'll probably have to switch back to what I'm doing right now, which is record and upload. In addition to that, the transition to 4K also requires that I may actually have to produce a few new assets. And some of those assets may or may not already exist due to some of my efforts on DeviantArt years ago, back in 2015, 2016, when I was experimenting with new logos and stuff like that. I actually created a few new assets because of the fact that I wanted to see if I could make a new logo that could be easily upscaled to new resolutions and stuff like that. A vectorized logo of sorts, and one that I had in mind was actually something that looked kind of like the TopHat logo but made out of ribbons instead. It was hand drawn. Now that was never finalized, but that could end up being finalized in the near future because all the assets I currently have on the channel aren't really optimized for 4K. They barely work at 1080p and full HD, but they definitely would not work at 4K. And all attempts at trying to actually upscale those assets have not gone too well. They all looked blotchy, ugly, and just disgusting when upscaled using artificial means. So I'm probably going to have to actually make a few new assets. But that may or may not be completed by the end of this week. Moving on to gaming content. This ties in directly with the 4K effort. As it stands, if I try to do any gaming content in 4K, it's probably going to be pre-recorded and then uploaded. That's because of the fact that, once again, 4K live streaming just isn't working right now. Not in a reliable manner. VR is probably going to get pushed off also just due to the issues that we're experiencing right now, probably into mid to late 2021. How often? Maybe once a month at this point, because of the fact that I really want to get the server project done before I start doing that. And I really don't want to do VR from the workstation at this point, because if I try to do VR from the workstation, anything that I set up on the workstation will then have to be adapted and modified to the server when the server is running 24/7. And to be quite honest, I'd rather just get everything running on the server instead of trying to get everything working on the workstation and then moving it to the server, because I know that the settings for the workstation won't be the ones I use on the server. The server has a completely different software environment, completely different power requirements and everything, and as such I'm pretty sure that anything that I do here on this setup won't work quite as well on the server, will need to be adapted and modified. And on the last point of who decides what gets streamed and how often, I would like to actually return to some form of viewer or audience based system where you guys get to actually vote on what shows up on the channel next. However, in order for that to work, we need a way higher level of user audience engagement. So at some point in the near future, what I'll do is I'll bring back the title and end cards. And when I do, I'll need you guys to actually start voting and to actually start leaving comments again, stating what you want to see next. Because when it comes to the gaming videos, it's usually more effective if you guys decide what you see next. I have a massive game library, but in the end, if you guys don't want to see half of the games that are there, then it's not going to work. It's not going to be worth me live streaming that stuff. Because in the end, it's only fun if we're both enjoying the experience. So as such, I'm going to need you guys to actually engage with the end cards especially, and to let me know what you want to see in the future. With that, I'm going to go on and end the video here. If you like the video, leave a like. Maybe subscribe if you want to see more videos and content like this in the future. Be sure to check out our other content streams. We have DeviantArt, we have Toy House, we have Hayun's Dojo. We're working on getting all that stuff up and running, but we need user engagement to let us know what stuff to do when and how often. In addition to that, the server project is also a full-time thing, with Minecraft mod packs being kind of secondary and all else being kind of tertiary. So be sure to engage, and as of now, we are still trying to make sure that we push content to both Twitch and YouTube, but if necessary, we may just resort to doing only YouTube. And if I remember correctly, I don't know if this video is going to show up on Library. And the reason why I'm not sure if it'll show up in Library is because of the fact that I didn't live stream it this time. But if push comes to shove, I could just upload it to Twitch, YouTube, and Library. It's just that it'll take longer, and it'll have to actually process. Aside from that, there isn't really much else to talk about. I've covered pretty much everything that I meant to talk about, and I'll have to actually update the video descriptions for both of these on Twitch and YouTube after the fact. You guys have a good night. Hope you're having a great Columbus Day. We will see you in the next video. Peace.